Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hagaraja Raven. I'm here with my recap and review of the Gilded Age season number 1, episode number 9, which is the season 1 finale. And I enjoyed this finale. I really liked how the writers ended up setting things for what we can expect when season 2 rolls out. And yeah, for those of you wondering, the show has been renewed for season 2. And yeah, of course I'll be covering season 2. I actually ended up really enjoying season 1. I wasn't expecting it to. Like, it's not Downton Abbey, but it's still good. It's still able to hold its own. And yeah, season number 2, I'm looking forward to it. So anyway, episode number 9 opens up with Marian having this conversation with Mrs. Chamberlain. So yeah, it's time for Marian to basically say yes to Mr. Rakes and both of them to get married without Marian's aunts knowing. And Mrs. Chamberlain is like, you know what, Marian? I will support you in whatever you do, but I do have to ask. Are you really, really sure that Mr. Rakes has it in him to leave New York for you? Is he ready to walk away from the high society and all of that stuff? And Marian is like, yes, he is. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about status. He only loves me. And Mr. Chambers is like, okay, if you say so. And yeah, you know, as a viewer, you know that Mr. Rakes is going to do something, even though he says that he loves Marian. The appeal of staying in high society and basically moving around in money, that's way too much for him. And that really, yeah, we really get to see that side of Mr. Rakes more as the episode progresses. And I'm like, oh, poor Marian. But you know what, we'll talk about Mr. Rakes in a bit. So basically, the plan is that Marian is going to leave home and she's going to come to Mrs. Chamberlain, and Mrs. Chamberlain is also going to entertain Mr. Rakes, and then both of them are going to go and get married, and then what will come, and they'll somehow manage to try and ask forgiveness from the aunts. So while that's happening, of course, Bertha is very, very concerned about her preparations for the ball. I think the ball is tomorrow, and Bertha's like, you know what, it feels small. Church, it feels small, and Church is like, if you say so, ma'am. But basically, the staff knows that Mrs. Russell isn't always very satisfied with things. But yeah, she's not very happy. But then again, moving on, we get to see Mr. Baudouin, and Mr. Baudouin has this letter, and he ends up reading the letter, and he's very, very concerned. And while that's happening, Mr. Church is having a conversation with Mrs. Bruce in the back, and yeah, Mrs. Bruce is like, okay, so is Mrs. Russell happy? And Mr. Church is like, well, when is Mrs. Russell ever happy? Then we cut to Marian and Mr. Rakes, and they are meeting each other at the park. And this is where Mr. Rakes is like, are you ready for this, Marian? And Marian is like, are you ready for this? And Mr. Rakes is like, yeah, let's do this. Let's get married. And I love you, Marian. I love you. And we will make a life for ourselves moving forward as a married couple and whatnot. And yeah, Marian is very, very excited. And I'm like, oh, you poor girl. Then we got to Bertha. So Bertha's idea was that she was going to go and call on Miss Astor herself, face to face, and she goes to the residence, and she ends up meeting Hefty, and Hefty is like, oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Russell, but Miss Astor isn't inside the house. And Bertha is like, are you sure about that, Hefty? And Hefty is like, yeah, she's not in. And Bertha is like, well, you didn't tell her about what happened during back in Newport, did you? And Hefty doesn't necessarily answer, and he's just like, you know what, Mrs. Russell, you should leave, she's not in. And before Mrs. Russell leaves, she notices another woman going in the house, and yeah, Bertha knows that Miss Astor is inside the house, but as she has done before, Miss Astor just doesn't want to meet Bertha, and Bertha is like, you know what, enough is enough, I'm going to put my foot down. And she does. So I think it's dinner time, and all of them are having dinner. And this is where Bertha is like, you know what, Gladys, I'm so sorry, but I don't think that Carrie Astor can be part of the performance. And Gladys is like, what the heck are you talking about, Mom? Yeah, Bertha's like, well, I went to meet Miss Astor today, and Miss Astor wasn't home. She didn't welcome me, she's avoiding me, and you know that if Miss Astor doesn't come to the party, there's no need for Carrie to be there either. And yeah, Russell tries to reason with his wife, and Larry also tries to defend Gladys, because Russell and Larry are like, you know what, they have been rehearsing for weeks, everything is settled, why can't you just let Carrie be there without her mom? And Bertha's like, no, enough is enough. If Miss Astor isn't going to meet me, or the rest of the parents of the other children are going to meet me, then I'm not going to invite all of them to the party. And it is what it is. And as far as the guest list is concerned, I'll figure something out. And I kind of like the side of Bertha. You know what? How many times is she going to be disrespected by Miss Astor? She had to do something about it. Then we cut to Peggy, and Peggy is here to pick up her things, and she ends up going to meet Marian, and Marian is like painting something, which I think this is the same painting she ends up gifting to Mrs. Chamberlain later on in the episode. But yeah, Marian is like, so it's real, right? You aren't going to come back. You are really leaving. And Peggy's like, yep, I'm leaving. But anyway, tell me about you, girl. What are you up to? And are you really going to get married to Mr. Rakes and whatnot? And Marian was like, yep, I am, and it is what it is, and as far as my aunts are concerned, we'll handle it later. And she's like, you know what, Peggy, I would like to ask you a favor. And Peggy's like, okay, what? And she's like, you know what, I have to take my luggage to Mrs. Chamberlain, but if I take it, it might end up drawing suspicion, so will you do me a favor and take the luggage with you to Mrs. Chamberlain and then wait for me there? I just want your support. And Peggy is like, yeah, I'll support you. And I think in her mind, she's like, this is a very crazy woman. So we got to Carrie, and yeah, Carrie ended up getting a letter from Bertha, which basically ended up uninviting her from the ball because her mother wouldn't be there, and Carrie is unhappy about it, understandably, and she ends up talking about it to her mom, and she's like, you know what, mother, because of you, I've been uninvited to the ball, and yada yada yada. And Miss Astor is like, well, Carrie, what do you want me to do? I'm never going to entertain Bertha, so it is what it is, you just have to deal with it. And Carrie is like, and she just walks away. So Peggy's taking the luggage, and she ends up meeting Ada, and Ada's like, okay, so you're really going? And Peggy's like, you know what, I am. However, I'm very grateful for all of your kindness and everything. And Ada is like, well, we liked having you here, and we wish you all the luck in your life. And also, Peggy, you don't have to take the back door. You can use the front door, because there's no need for you to carry all of this luggage down to the basement and then to the kitchen and then coming back up. And as Peggy is walking towards the front door, this is where Ada notices the luggage that Peggy is carrying, and she's like, wait, doesn't Marian have the same suitcase? And Peggy is like, well, this is Marian's because she ended up lending it to me for my move. And Ada's like, Peggy, you won't support Marian on something childish, right? Something foolish. And Peggy is like, well, you know what, Aunt Ada, I would actually try to convince her not to go with it. And Ada's like, well, that didn't answer my question. So yeah, Ada is picking up things. She's like, Marian is up to something. So we cut to Mr. Russell, and he's talking to his right hand, and yeah, this is where they talk about this guy. I think his name is something Cooper, and he wants a loan from the Russells, and Mr. Russell is like, his wife is very favored by Miss Astor, and yeah, you can tell that Russell's mind is already working to how to use Mr. Cooper's wife to his advantage. So we got to Miss Astor, and it's time for dinner, but Carrie apparently has locked herself up in her room, and she's like, you know what, bring a tray for me upstairs to my bedroom, and I won't be coming downstairs to sit down and eat dinner with my mom. And yeah, she's basically, she's angry at her mom, which again is understandable, and it's basically a fight between mother and daughter about who's going to break first, because Carrie wants Miss Astor to actually go and apologize to Bertha and basically be at Gladys's ball. So we cut to Marian and Ada is like, you know what, Marian, what's up? What's up, girl? Tell me what's up. You need to tell me. What are you up to? And Marian is like, Aunt Ada, you know what? I'm just going to go and marry Mr. Rakes. And Ada's like, what the heck? Are you crazy? And Marian is like, it is what it is. I have to do this. I'm in love, and yada, yada, yada. And she's like, you know what? And I'll be going to Mrs. And I already have a plan set. And don't worry, Aunt Agnes will come around. And Ada's like, you know what, she would have came around if you waited, but you are not waiting. You're being very hasty about this. And Marian is like, well, I'm in love. And I'm like, oh, Marian. So anyway, Ada's like, okay, so I guess good luck. So we cut to Mr. Boudoir, and it turns out that Mr. Boudoir has something to tell Mr. Russell because of the letter that he read, and he's like, Mr. Russell, I'm going to tell you something about myself, and it might end up resulting in my termination. And Mr. Russell is like, okay, out with it. So it turns out... So Mr. Russell ends up talking to Bertha about what to do with Mr. Boudoir. So yeah, it turns out that Mr. Boudoir isn't really a French chef. He's from I think he's from Wichita, and his name is Budwin or something. I'm not really sure. Yeah, something that starts with the B and ends with an N. And Bertha's like, okay, so what the heck do you want me to do, George? We just can't have him here. If people found out, we'll be a laughing stock. We have to fire him. And Russell is like, do we really have to fire him? Like, the food is good, and we can keep him around. He's loyal. And Bertha's like, I will be giving him excellent references, so there's nothing for him to worry about. But he needs to go, George. He needs to go. But George is like, what about the freaking ball? How are we going to prepare all of the meals before that? And Bertha's like, well, we'll hire someone else, an actual French chef. So Mr. Bourgeois ends up telling everyone about his truth, that he's from Wichita, and that and that his wife is basically trying to blackmail him. He didn't divorce her, and now she wants his money, and yada yada yada. And I'm like, you know what, Mr. Bourgeois, in a sense, you have been basically stealing from George, because you ended up pretending to be a French cook, and you ended up getting paid a lot of money for it. But anyway, he ends up sharing his actual accent with everyone, and he's like, you know what? I have been keeping up this facade for way too many years, and it's going to take me time to actually come into my own. And yeah, he's like, you know what? But bye bye. I guess this is bye bye from me for now. So we cut to Bertha, and apparently she walks in. Not apparently. Why did I say apparently? But yeah, she walks in, and she ends up seeing Carrie talking to Gladys, and Bertha's like, "What, child? What are you doing here?" And Carrie is like, "Well, She basically tries to make her case. She's like, you really aren't going to invite me to Gladys's ball because my mom won't be there. And Bertha is like, what do you want me to do? This is how the cookie crumbles. If your mom isn't going to be there, then you can't be there at the ball. And she's like, okay, so Mrs. Russell, I want to ask you, if my mom apologizes, will you then reconsider? And Bertha is like, of course. And Carrie is like, oh, your kindness knows no bounds, and yada yada yada. After how my mom ended up treating you, you're still willing to forgive her. And Bertha is like, of course I am. So we got to the new chef, and his name is Mr. Curon or something. And yeah, Mrs. Bruce ends up trying to tell him that Mr. Boudoir ended up making a whole lot of preparations, and he wrote everything down in his notebook. And Mr. Choron is like, no, I don't really care about all of this. I'll do things on my own. And they're like, well, Mrs. Russell wouldn't like that. And he's like, the ball is tomorrow, and Mrs. Russell is going to take whatever I give her. Then we got to Mr. Russell and Bertha, and he's talking to Bertha, and yeah, they're talking about what was it that they were talking about? I'm kind of forgetting. I think they were talking about the upcoming ball and how if Miss Astor doesn't come, then what the heck are they going to do, and all of that stuff. And Bertha's like, you know what, George, I have everything planned. There's nothing for you to worry about. Basically, Bertha thinks that Miss Astor will come, and George is like, okay, we'll see. The ball is tomorrow, though. So we got to dinner at the Van Ryans, and Oscar's there for dinner as well. And this is where Aunt Ada and Agnes and everyone are talking about Peggy leaving. And basically, Oscar wants his mom to be truthful about her feelings. And he's like, you know what? You are sad that she's gone, right? And Agnes is like, of course I am sad, Oscar, that she's gone. Is that what you wanted to hear? And then this is where also Marian is like, you know what, aunts, I will be very busy tomorrow, so don't freak out if I don't make it home till morning. And yeah, Ada's like, she's up to something, but Agnes doesn't really suspect anything. And then we cut to this conversation between Carrie and Miss Astor. And Carrie is still not talking to her mom. And she's like, you know what, Mom? I got invited to Gladys's ball because of you. But you know what? Mrs. Russell is still willing to invite all of us if you apologize to her. And Miss Astor is like, do you really think that I'm weak enough in front of Bertha in order to apologize? That I'll apologize to her? And yeah, Carrie is like, well, we'll see. So basically, Carrie is emotionally blackmailing her mom because she knows that her mom really, really loves her, and she's using that to her advantage to basically tone down Miss Astor's pride a bit, and it does work. It does work. So we cut to Mrs. Fane, and she's at the opera with her husband, and then she ends up noticing Tom Rakes in the back, and I think he's sitting with, what's her name, Miss Brigham or something. And yeah, Aurora has had her suspicions about Tom basically flirting with very rich women, young women, and she's like, yep, I need to tell this to Marian, there's something going on between these two, just look at him whispering in her ear. So it's the morning. The ball is today, and George is like, okay, so how's the guest list coming? Do you really think that we'll be able to fill the ball? And Bertha is like, well, Aurora has been busy, and if Miss Astra and others don't make it, then we have other people that we will be inviting. So don't worry about this, George. And George is like, I really want to see what cards you think you have up your sleeves. And yeah, Bertha is like, well, George, I'm taking a chance, and you should know about this, that nothing will ever come easily to you until you take a chance and whatnot. So this is my chance here. So let's see how it all plays out. So it's time for Marian to leave, and Ada, before she leaves, Ada comes in and she wants to talk to Marian, and she's like, Marian, are you really sure you want to do this? And Marian is like, I have to do this, Aunt Ada, I have to. And this is where she ends up telling Aunt Ada that she'll be going to Mrs. Chamberlain, and Ada's like, what the heck, you're going to Mrs. Chamberlain's? She's the one supporting you? And yeah, Marian is like, I have no other choice. And once all of this is done, then I'll try and recover my relationship with Aunt Agnes. And Ada's like, you know what? Good luck to you. Good luck. So before she leaves, she ends up walking towards Larry, and she's like, Larry, I need to ask you a favor. So I want you to deliver these 2 envelopes to my aunts at 7. Will you do that? And Larry is like, of course I'll do that, but what's all of this about? And Miriam's like, I can't tell you right now, I'll tell you later. And this is where Larry is also like, I hope that this isn't you being way too desperate. And Miriam's like, no, not necessarily desperation, but this is something that I need to do. And then she goes off to Mrs. Chamberlain, and also before she goes, she ends up talking to Jack about how he needs to tell the staff that she values them. So we cut to Larry and George in the carriage, and George is like, okay, so what the heck was that about? And Larry is like, well, she just wanted to ask a favor about delivering some envelopes, and when she has decided to do something, Marian does it. She's the one who ended up telling me that I should tell you about my dream of becoming an architect. And George is like, oh, okay, I'm not really sure how I was supposed to receive that information. And Larry is like, well, Father, this is a new world, it's progressing, and I want to be a part of it. And I think that George is really, really slowly coming over, and he's like, you know what, I think I should let my son do what he wants to do. So, talking about letters, we cut to Peggy's mom, and it's time for, and the maid is like getting ready to wash Peggy's mom's husband's clothes. However, there's a letter in his pocket, and she takes it out, and dun dun dun. Basically, I think as viewers, we kind of knew that Peggy's son was still alive, and yeah, that's the big reveal that we get in this episode. So Peggy is at Mrs. Chamberlain as well, and we get a little scene where, yeah, the help isn't necessarily willing to pour Peggy tea, and Mrs. Chamberlain is like, you need to do it, and he does with a weird smile on his face. I think that I really, considering all of the context and the type of story being told, I think that the racial thing was handled quite well in this show. So as everyone is waiting, this is where Marian sits down with Mrs. Chamberlain, and she ends up gifting her the picture, the painting that she created, and Mrs. Chamberlain is like, you know what, I will cherish this. And I'm like, okay, so Marian wants to become a painter. I'm not against it. I would like to see Marian pursue her interests as a painter, basically getting actual education and whatnot when it comes to painting, but let's see what happens. So Aurora Fane comes to the Marian house, and she's like, is Marian here? Ada's like, no, she's not here. But what's up, Aurora? Spill the tea. And yeah, Aurora is like, you know what? I ended up seeing Tom being very flirty with Miss Brigham, and this is bad. I really don't want Marian to know about this. And Ada's like, oh no, it could already be too late. But Aurora's like, what the heck are you talking about? And yeah, Ada's like, she's at Mrs. Chamberlain. Go, shoo. You need to hurry and tell Marian about this. And of course, Aurora runs towards Mrs. Chamberlain. So we get a conversation between Mr. Cooper and George, and George is like, you know what, I will give you the loan that you want. I think it's like $1 million, and yeah, I will give you the loan that you want. However, I have a condition. And Mr. Cooper is like, okay, so what's the condition? And he's like, well, I'm going to invite you to my daughter's ball. And Mr. Cooper is like, okay, I'll be there. And no, George is like, no, your wife needs to be there too. And he's like, what the heck, my wife? What if she's busy? And yeah, George basically tells Mr. Cooper that if he and his wife aren't at the ball, then he can say goodbye to the loan. And Mr. Cooper is like, well, you aren't a gentleman. And George is like, tell me something I don't know. So basically, yeah, I like seeing George always looking out for his wife. So as Bertha is waiting in her study, this is where Church comes in, and Church is like, Miss Astor is waiting for you outside. She basically came and announced, and yeah, Bertha's like, oh, really? Oh. And then we have a very, very interesting conversation between Bertha and Miss Astor. And Miss Astor is like, you know what, Bertha? There's no need for you to basically go against my daughter. There's no need for us to have a falling out. Because when you came over to my place that day, I needed to meet someone else privately, and that's why I couldn't entertain you. And Bertha's like, you know what, with all due respect, if that was true, then you would have called me another day. It's just that you didn't want to meet me that day, right? And Miss Astor is like, yeah, I guess you got me there. So yeah, before Bertha leaves, Bertha's like, you know what, I am willing to forgive you. However, I have my conditions. I need you to attend my daughter's ball, and I also need you to extend an invitation to Mrs. Van Ryan and her sister, and I want them to come over too. And Miss Astor is like, really? You want those two women to come over too? And Bertha is like, it is what it is. They are my neighbors, but I feel that they continue to cut me out. So do this for me, and then I'll invite you and Carrie back into the ball. And Miss Astor is like, okay, so what if I don't do this? What if I don't change my mind? And Bertha is like, well, that's up to you. If you do, because I'm not going to move from my position. And yeah, it's basically a battle between Bertha and Miss Astor, and I'm here for it. So we cut to Marian and Mrs. Chamberlain's. Aurora is there. Aurora ended up telling Marian what she saw concerning Tom, and Marian was like, no, I believe you that he was talking to the young woman, but I think that you are missing the context. He won't cheat on me, right? He still loves me, he wants to marry me. And they're like, okay, so where the heck is he? Wasn't he supposed to be here like hours ago? And then Marian tries to justify him being late. She's like, maybe he got in an accident, maybe he got late and whatnot. And Aurora's like, dear, short of him getting murdered, there's no reason for him to not be here, or at least send a message. And Marian's like, you know what, I have to go. I need to go to his office and I'll check on him. And Aurora's like, do you want me to come with you? And Peggy's like, no, you sit. I'll go with her. As originally planned. So Marian and Peggy go to Tom's office, and after they leave, we get the scene between Aurora and Mrs. Chamberlain. And Aurora's like, you know what, Mrs. Chamberlain, I appreciate you keeping Marian's integrity and protecting it and all of that stuff, and not causing a scandal. And Mrs. Chamberlain is like, yeah, well, you can count on me. And as Aurora leaves, we get this weird expression with Mrs. Chamberlain, and I'm like, what's this about? Is she going to do something? Or maybe Mrs. Chamberlain thinks that she can hook her son with Marian. Who knows? So we cut to Miss Astor, and she's talking to Alistair and McAllister, and she's like, what the heck do you want me to do, Ward? And Ward is like, you know what, my divine rose, I think that you need to make a decision. If you continue to shun these new money people out, they're going to make their own society, and they're going to shut their doors to us, and we can't have that. And Miss Astor is like, do you really think that Bertha can beat me at my own game? And Ward is like, you know what, is that a risk you're willing to take? I really think that you need to go to the ball and also invite Mrs. Van Ryan. You need to do this, Miss Astor, you need to do this, and what will come, and we'll figure out how to deal with Bertha moving forward. So yeah, of course, Mrs. Van Ryan gets an invitation, and she's like, okay, so I think Lena ended up losing her mind because she really wants us to go over to the Russells, and basically it's kind of a veiled threat because, you know what, I really don't want to quarrel with Miss Astor right now. And Ada's like, it will be fun. I really wanted to go and see the house from the inside. And yeah, Mrs. Van Ryan doesn't necessarily have another choice. She has to do what Miss Astor wants her to do. And she's like, you know what, we won't quarrel with Miss Astor right now, but we might end up quarreling with Mrs. Russell down the line, so let's see what happens. So Marian ends up finding Tom at his office, and yeah, we get the waterworks. She's crying, and she's like, "Tom, what happened? Weren't we supposed to be married today? What did you do? What's up?" And Tom ends up saying, la, 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 la. He's trying to make excuses, and he's like, "You know what? I just figured that." I can't leave New York. I've become accustomed to it, and even though I still love you, I'm not really sure if I can leave the society that I'm actually in. And Miriam was like, yeah. So you really want money, huh? And I think Miss Brigham can give you the money. And Tom is like, oh, Miriam, that's unfair. But yeah, basically Miriam is like, you know what? I don't have time for this. I do not have time for you. And she decides to walk out, and Tom is like, you know what, Marian, you're such an extraordinary person, but we can part as friends, right? And Marian's like, is he crazy? She's like, no. We can't be friends, Mr. Rakes, but we won't be enemies either because I don't like bitterness. And she walks out, and I'm like, yeah. Tom is really a piece of work, huh? Wanting to stay friends with Marian, wanting to sleep with her, and all of that stuff. And I'm like, oh, Mrs. Van Ryan was correct when she ended up seeing him for the first time. So Peggy is waiting for Marian outside, and she ends up supporting her, and she's like, Marian, you know what? Go home. Relax, try to calm yourself, and I need to go back to my parents' house. And Brianna is like, and then the bell rings, and she's like, oh no, I just remembered, Larry is going to deliver the letters, I have to stop him. So she rushes back home, and then Miss Astor ends up telling Carrie that, you know what, I ended up talking to Bertha, and we will be going to the ball because Bertha ended up inviting them. And Carrie is like, oh, mother, thank you so much. And yeah, Miss Astor is like, I might end up to regret this. And Carrie is like, no, you won't. And yeah, this is where basically Miss Astor is like, after your father left, I'm all alone. And I really can't be all alone in this house without you. And I'm like, really, Carrie, are you happy? Are you happy now? Basically blackmailing your mom. So, of course, Gladys is very happy that Carrie will be coming. And she ends up hugging Bertha. And Bertha, I think she's happy. She's happy that Gladys is happy. But also she's happy that even though Gladys is happy, simultaneously she got what she wanted. So Larry is about to give the letters to the aunts, and Marian rushes in, and she's like, oh, Larry, I'm surprised to see you here. And she ends up creating an entire story about how Larry ended up picking up the mail, but before he could deliver it, he ended up deciding to come and check on the aunts, and Ada kind of supports her as well. And Larry is able to pick up, and I'm like, okay, so it's a good thing that Larry is clever, and he was able to pick up on the story being told. And yeah, Agnes is just confused. Agnes is very, very confused. So Marian shows Larry to the door, and she's like, I'm grateful for the favor. And Larry is like, can I ask what happened? And Marian is like, no, not right now. And Larry is like, okay, so you will be coming to the ball, right? And Marian is like, yeah, I think I will. And he asks Marian if she'll save a dance for him, and she doesn't necessarily respond. And I'm like, you know what, come season 2, I want to see these two become a thing, and maybe someone else. At this point, I'll be okay if the show ends up writing off Tom, but let's see what happens. So we cut to Peggy, and yeah, Peggy's mom ended up telling her about her son being alive and basically living with an adoptive family in Pennsylvania, I guess. And yeah, Peggy wants him back. Peggy really, really wants him back. So we cut to the Russell's house, and it's time for the ball, and yeah, George is like, let the tournament begin. And yeah, the guests start arriving, and as the Russells are greeting the guests, this is where Church comes up to Mr. Russell, and he's like, you know what, there's a situation in the kitchen. And George is like, can you handle it? Church is like, yeah, I can handle it. And then we cut to Mr. Watson, and yeah, Mr. Watson, the woman that he's basically been stalking, she is invited too. And yeah, I'm not really sure. Is he supposed to be her father, her brother? What's happening here? I'm not really sure. I guess we'll find out in season 2. So it turns out that Mr. Juron, I guess he ended up drinking too much, and he's babbling, and yeah, he needs to be put to bed. And yeah, Church is like, you know what? He tells one of the boys to run to this address and basically get Mr. Boudoir back so that he can handle this entire thing, because dinner needs to be served in like 2-3 hours. And then we cut to the Van Ryans walking towards the Russells, and yeah, this is where Marian is like, you know what, Aunt? If you didn't want to come to the ball, why didn't you tell Miss Astor that you didn't want to go? And this is where Mrs. Van Ryan is like, you know what, Marian? One of the biggest mistakes that you can make is overestimating your power. And yeah, I don't want to quarrel with Miss Astor. So yeah, Mrs. Van Ryan realizes that Miss Astor has a whole lot of influence when it comes to high society. So we cut to Jack and oh no, I forgot her name. I forgot her name. So yeah, these two are talking about how they would have liked to be invited, and Jack is like, you know what? Maybe one day we might be invited to such parties. This is America after all. So I guess Jack is trying to figure out how to make money or start a business in season 2. Let's see. So yeah, Miss Astor and Carrie arrive. Ward McAllister is there as well, and Ward is like, "Oh, look how happy we all look together," and I'm like, that this is just going to cause drama. So we cut to Gladys's performance. The young men are there, the young women are there. They have these horse marks on, and yeah, everyone is happy. Everyone is having a good time, and you can actually see Bertha, George, Miss Astor, and Ward McAllister standing over here. And as the performance is going on, this is where Miss Astor is like, Bertha, you know what? How do you know that I won't be destroying you after tonight? And Bertha is like, you won't, because you and I, we are the same. And Miss Astor is like, what do you mean? Bertha is like, we are the same. We both want what we want, and we get what we want. And also, I'm going to tell you right now that if you allow me, then I'll be a very, very good friend to you. And Miss Astor is like, I guess she's going to think about it. So Gladys's performance is done, and she has to go and change out of her costume, and Oscar runs up to her, and Oscar is like, you know what, Gladys, dance with me right now. And Gladys is like, nah, Oscar, I'm finally out, and that means that I can do what I want, so I need to go and get changed, and after that we'll dance. And Oscar's like, okay. And when he turns around, he actually sees John dancing with another woman, and yeah, John and Oscar... I mean, Oscar loves him, but John feels insecure, which is understandable. So Tom decided to attend the ball with the Brigham, or whatever the family name is, and he ends up walking up to Marian, and he's like, you know what, Marian, I never expected your aunts to allow that they were going to allow you to come to the ball. If I had known, I wouldn't have come. And Marian's like, oh, don't worry about it, Tom. But anyway, I have to ask you. Did you really know? Had you already decided that you were going to dump me after a conversation at the park? And Tom is like, no, never. I still love you, Marian. I still love you. And Marian is like, okay, but love is never enough, huh? And yeah, I'm like, Marian, stop talking to Tom. It doesn't care. I don't give a flying that he loves you, because he doesn't love you. If he had actually loved you, that he wouldn't have treated you like a piece of trash like he did, and dumping you like that. And yeah, Marian just walks away and she cries. And again, at this point, if they end up writing Tom out of the show, I'm here for it, because I want to see Marian basically interact with men that actually want to be with her. So as she is basically trying to hold back her tears, this is where Larry walks in, and Larry is like, are you okay? I saw you talking to Tom earlier. And she's like, oh, it's nothing. He's just somebody that I used to know. And she's like, you know what? You asked for a dance. Let's dance. And I'm here for Marian and Larry. I'm kind of here for it. So Gladys decides to dance with Oscar, and Oscar is very, very happy about it, and Bertha notices it, Mrs. Van Ryn notices it, and I'm like, you know what, if Mrs. Van Ryn wants to quarrel with Bertha, she might end up using Oscar, so let's see what happens there. So everyone is dancing, George and Bertha are dancing as well, and George is like, you know what, do you really think that... Miss Astor is going to accept your offer for friendship? And Bertha is like, who knows, but all of that is for tomorrow. Let's focus on the ball and have fun. So everyone's dancing. And once the ball is over, Oscar, of course, goes to the apartment where John is waiting for him. And yeah, John is not happy. And Oscar is like, you know what, John, you don't have anything to worry about. Nothing will change. I promise you that. And I love you. And they kiss. And I'm like, oh, I foresee a lot of drama for these two in season 2. But yeah, let's see how all of that is handled. And then we cut to the drama between Peggy and her father, and yeah, the mom is supporting Peggy, and both of the women are like, you know what, we know what you did, we know that Peggy's son is still alive, and he's like, leave that child away, out of this. What I did was for the good, everything that I did was to benefit Peggy and her child. I didn't want Peggy to be strapped down with a child without a father, and basically causing a scandal and whatnot. And yeah, Peggy and her mom aren't happy about it, and they're like, you know what, we're going to Pennsylvania, we're going to track the child down. And the father is like, you know what, you'll do this without my help. And they're like, okay, we'll do this either way. So I guess season number 2 is going to have these two going to Pennsylvania and meeting up with the child. Let's see what happens. Maybe Peggy will understand that, you know what, the child has been living with a new adoptive family and he's happy there, so there's no need for Peggy to take him away. But let's see what happens. So Larry decides to walk Marian to the house, and he's like, okay, so how are you after the Tom thing? So I guess he kind of, Marian ended up telling him. And yeah, Marian is like, I feel numb. And Larry is like, you know what, numb is good, numb is good. Just remember to take care of yourself when the numbness fades away. And Marian is like, yeah, I will. That's also a good piece of advice. So because Mr. Boudoir really came through a big way to save the ball and everything, this is where George is like, you know what, we'll rehiring you. And Mr. Boudoir is like, is Bertha okay? Is Mrs. Russell okay with it? Mrs. Russell is like, you know what, I'm okay. I really like the dynamic between Bertha and George, because even though George allows Bertha to run the house as she wants to, when it comes down to it, when it's necessary, George knows how to put his foot down as well and basically work with Bertha to make certain decisions. And that's something that I liked, that these two are basically partners in the relationship. So Marian ends up going into her room. Ada walks up, and Ada's like, okay, so how was it? Did you enjoy the ball in spite of Tom being there? And Marian is like, yeah, Tom and the family that he was with, they ended up leaving soon after you guys left. So yeah, that allowed me to have fun without him being there. And Ada's like, you know what, Marian, there's no need for you to continue feeling disappointed. There's still a whole lot of New York for you to explore. There's still a whole lot of new people for you to meet. And there are good days ahead of you, my dear. There are good days ahead of you. So right now, go to sleep, and tomorrow is a new day. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here for Marian finding happiness. I'm here for it. So the episode comes to a close, and we actually see Bannister and making eye contact with Mr. Church. And I'm like, wasn't Bannister supposed to get his revenge on Mr. Church? Maybe that will happen in season number 2 if the writers remember. Who knows? But basically, the episode closes with everyone cleaning up after the party. And yeah, season number 2. I want it right now. And if I end up doing a written review of this for the Geekieri, the link to my review down in the comment section below. As soon as the review is published, let me know what you thought of the Gilded Age season number 1, episode number 9, the season 1 finale. I enjoyed it. I really did. But yeah, let me know what you thought, and until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later. Bye.